What's up, Night Owl Steely here, back with another Rime of the Frostmaiden video, and today we're going to be talking about Vellynne Harpell. Now, this video is mainly for dungeon masters running Rime of the Frostmaiden, not so much for players. This information is going to be a little bit of Velynne's backstory. She's featured pretty heavily in the ending chapters of Rime of the Frostmaiden, and what you decide to do with her is really important because she's such a prominent NPC and an ally to the party, at least by the book all the way to the end. She's an ally to the party. So I'm going to give you some recommendations on how to role play her, how to use her, what to do with her at the end, things like her spell book, and so on. So to start with, let's talk about her family name, Harpell. Most of the information about the Harpell family is scattered around various different books. I would recommend hitting up the Forgotten Realms wiki if you really want to deep dive into that family. I'll go over a couple of the highlights. They're a clan of wizards who are mostly from Longsaddle, which is just east of the Swords Coast. They live in the Ivy Mansion, and they have their own tavern known as the Fuzzy Quarterstaff, which operates entirely by magic. There's these little crystal gems at the table where patrons can place their orders, and then a floating blue disc will come and deliver their order. Velynne is from this family, and despite her firm grasp on the dark arts of necromancy, she was still only admitted into the Arcane Brotherhood because of her family connections, which she does not like at all. Velynne is described as cold and dispassionate, and she only took to magic in her late 40s, which the book says was a decade ago, putting Velynne in her late 50s. Velynne suffers from a nervous disorder which causes her to tremble, which throws off her balance and her stride, but she has learned to cast spells unimpeded by the trembling. Velynne came to Icewind Dale looking for the lost city of Ithrin, which is a crashed Netherese floating city. She brought with her a family heirloom known as Professor Scant, which is a professor orb who has a great deal of knowledge on Netherreal culture. So it provides a perfect companion for not only Velynne but the party to kind of give them information along the way about Netherese, and it also knows the Netherese language, so it can translate for them in the later chapters. Unfortunately, Professor Scant was stolen by another member of the Arcane Brotherhood when Velynne arrived in Icewind Dale. So her goal at the moment when she meets the party is to get that orb back, and then they can track down the lost city. Now, Velynne will ask the party to help her retrieve the orb, which just so happens to be in Grim Scala, where the Frostmaiden is. And it kind of lines up with the party's goal. So along the way, the party will encounter Nas Lantamir, or at least the corpse of Nas Lantamir and her ghost. And they will also find the Professor Orb, and then they will find the Codicil of White. All of this takes place in Grim Scala, which I go over in my chapter 5 video. Velynne keeps a total of 6 Icewind Kobolds with her at all times that she recruited while she was here in Icewind Dale. 2 of them died to an acid arrow cast by Nas Lantamir, the one that stole her Professor Orb, and she reanimated those 2 kobolds, being a necromancer and all. So she has 2 zombies, 2 zombie kobolds, and 4 regular kobolds with her. And if you've ever seen any of that promotional art with the 3 kobolds stacked on top of each other, wearing a trench coat, these are some of Velynne's kobolds. She sends those into the city to kind of gather information. Velynne has a snowy owl as her familiar, and she uses it just like every other wizard's familiar, to go out and scout. Thankfully, it's an owl, so it has flyby attack. It doesn't provoke for moving through, so it can actually cover a lot of ground, and it's not as threatened when it moves around in dungeons if it gets ambushed or whatnot. Unfortunately, it does have 1 HP, so it can get taken out pretty quick. But overall, Snowy Owl, she has access to that. It's up to you as the DM if you want to use that familiar to kind of scout for the party. You don't want Velynne to take too much. If the party already has a scout, you don't want to take anything from the party. She just needs to be there to add a little bit to the party. You don't want to take away somebody else's role with an NPC. That's not the way to go. Velynne is a wizard, so she does have a spell book. If there's another wizard in the party, they could possibly trade spells, giving Velynne access to new spells and your player access to new spells. She is a necromancer, so if you want to build her spell book differently than the book provides, you can add a couple more necromancy spells to it, but overall, the book gives you a pretty solid starting point. She also has a Wand of Magic Missile. This will be her bread and butter. At least when I ran her, mainly her combat actions were just to use her Wand of Magic Missile. That's guaranteed damage. It's simple, roll 3d4. That's the damage. Move on to the next person's turn. It's really simple. She'll focus fire anybody that the party member is attacking. She can just hit them with magic missiles, maybe use her familiar to give the help action to another party member, maybe the big damage dealer. It's up to you how involved she is in combat. When I personally ran her, I kept her on the back line shooting magic missiles and just kind of staying out of the party's way. I didn't want her to take away from the party. I may have backed her. She may have been a little bit too far back and out of view to the party, but I'll leave that up to you as the DM, what you do with Velynne. But she does have that wand of magic missiles, and I use that the majority of her time, of her actions in combat. If she starts getting low on health, she will use Vampiric Touch on one of her kobolds to kind of drain some of their life to heal herself. Now for the fun part. You want to come up with a voice and a personality for both Velynne and her professor, or Professor Scant. The direction that I personally took it and I had a lot of fun with was that, so Velynne is really intelligent. She's also up in the years, late 50s, according to the book. So late 50s, really intelligent and cold, calculating. I had to go with Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty. This is a really great personality archetype. A lot of my NPCs are really nice to the party, except for obvious enemies. Shopkeepers, barkeeps, all those are really nice to the party. So it was a breath of fresh air to have this character that was just really condescending and made the party like just kind of bash them for really bad ideas while having nothing but bad ideas of her own. I had a lot of fun with the Rick Sanchez version of Velynne. You can take that however you want. That's just how when I first saw late 50s cold calculating intelligent wizard, I was like, Rick Sanchez. If you've ever seen Rick and Morty, Rick Sanchez is Morty's grandfather, and he's just really condescending, really intelligent. As far as Professor Scant, I went with your traditional British butler, Geoffrey from Fresh Prince, Alfred from Batman, any of that typical English butler. That could be really fun with Professor Scant. He does kind of have that servant like personality because he's a professor. He's a magic item that essentially is a servant, but he's also really intelligent, has all the knowledge. So he talks to the other party members like they're his students. And this is by the book. So I went with that butler from Geoffrey from Fresh Prince and Alfred are solid options. Any other kind of British butler, they're all over the place in storylines. Having Rick Sanchez in the British butler is a really good combination for those two, and the party will get pretty attached to the two of them. At least mine did, and I had a lot of fun with them. Now, as far as what happens to Velynne or Professor Scant, I scripted this out in a really tragic way. A lot of my games are really upbeat and the party's always succeeding. And I realize it's a lot of a cliche to just kind of kill that NPC that's been with the party member so much. Maybe you can pull it off. Maybe it'll be kind of ham-fisted. I'll leave that on to you. But what I did personally is in chapter 6, the Caves of Hunger, the vampire grabbed a hold of Professor Scant and crushed it before it was eventually killed. Shortly before the party arrives in Ithrin. Now, this does mean that they won't have Professor Scant in Ithrin, but they will have Velynne, and she'll be able to kind of fill them in on information as they go. You can go that route if you want, get rid of them in the Caves of Hunger. As far as Velynne, I had her contract the Arcane Blight from Ithrin. And during some dramatic moment while the party is exploring the city, she will turn into a Nothic and attack the party. And you can have her, you can role play that however you want. I had her sort of remorseful, like she was still in there somewhere as she fought the party. She was apologizing to them as she was clawing them and using her gaze. And eventually the party had to kill Velynne. And I did this with a few groups, and it was great. It was great. I had a lot of fun with it. It was pretty cliche killing her off and killing off Professor Scant, especially Professor Scant. When he died, I think I tugged some tears out of my party, myself included. It was tough killing him. So I'll leave that up to you. Those are just my suggestions to get rid of those two if you want to. If you kind of want to have that dramatic effect, she can also come with the party on whichever ending they decide to go with. She's a great character. I had a lot of fun with her. So use that however you see fit. One more thing before I wrap up the video. I did have Velynne stock up on spell components. And if at any time while the party is adventuring, they're not going to be able to go back to town to resupply, So I had Velynne have a good stockpile of spell components, and whenever the party needed, let's say, diamonds for a revivify, if a party member goes down, maybe they didn't prepare a specific spell that they need now, and it needs a specific component, and they don't want to go all the way back to town. I had Velynne sort of act as a merchant for spell components specifically. That's kind of hard to do. It does villainize her a bit for her to say, well, I've got this component, but you got to buy it from me. So talk with your party about that. I talked with them about that, and I told them that Velynne would act as a merchant for spell components. And you can use that however you want, but I liked having her there. I liked having them have access to spell components. I do this in some games where I'll have a traveling merchant come by if they want to buy spell components or supplies for the crafter, the players that want to craft, things like that. Have those traveling merchants that kind of fill in. That way they don't feel like they're getting pulled back to town so they can resupply and etc. So I went that direction with Velynne. That's entirely up to you if you wanted to have those spell components available, if you want to have those available to be bought by your party mid-dungeon. Entirely up to you. And that's it for my thoughts on Vellynne Harpell. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know how YouTube works. Hit those buttons, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of Velynne. Let me know what direction you took her. I would love to hear your input on Velynne. Do you like some of those ideas? Do you hate some of them? Give me some criticism. And if you want to be a part of this D&D community, make sure you join the Discord, link in the description. Come by, ask questions, let me know what you think. And as always, I'll see you at sundown.